Well, since everybody got quiet, I guess we're ready to go. We still actually have a minute, but we'll go. All right, this is Session Identity Management from Ground Up by John Kiefler from Pittsburg State University. So welcome aboard, and thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes? Good? Okay, great. So my name is John Kiefler from Pittsburg State University, and welcome to Check. Today I'm going to be talking about identity management from the ground up. I'm going to take you through our identity management story, where we came from and where we are today, what our process looks like now, and how we got there. So I am the lead architecture developer at Pittsburg State. My contact info's up there. Feel free to email me, call me, shoot me a tweet. I do tweet. I have a lot of roles at Pittsburg State as far as system integrations, developing new software, things like that. I'm also an adjunct professor, so I get to see the student side of things, as well as an IT consultant a little bit on the side. So I've gotten to see a lot of industry patterns that way, so it's a good way to stay sharp, and it keeps me busy. Okay. So let's dive right into it. I kind of pushed all of the really cool stuff to the end, so I got to get through this fast. So I'm going to go through a lot, and I'm going to go pretty fast, but try to leave some time at the end for questions. Before identity management, or maybe this is where some of you are today. One person managed one thing, and someone managed something else, right? Somebody managed Active Directory accounts. Somebody managed email for employees, and somebody else managed it for students. Somebody manages who has a phone. Somebody manages some roles in our SIS system. Somebody manages your VPN access. Somebody manages if you have Office 365. And my biggest takeaway from this type of Wild West identity management, where one person does one thing and someone else does something else, is I hope nobody ever goes on vacation, right? Because what do we do if somebody's not here when we need them here to take care of that part of the system that they deal with? Well, we just have to wait, or maybe hope there's a backup. So I would say we were in this situation maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So we've been working very hard to get away from these patterns because there's some obvious concerns here. So back in 2012, we looked into getting a secure Wi-Fi on our campus. So before then it was open Wi-Fi. We needed to move to secure Wi-Fi. And in order to facilitate that transformation, we had to get everybody set up in our Active Directory the way they needed to be. Up until then, it had been the kind of thing, do you need an AD account? Yes or no? We'll make you one if you need one. Well, it got to the point where we needed everybody to be set up in Active Directory in a standard way for our campus Wi-Fi. So we turned this into an opportunity to kind of start with our identity management. So we set up a synchronization process from our system of record at the time, our student information system /HR/financial system at the time, all one system, a little bit frightening. We got that synchronizing to our Active Directory, and by doing that, we were able to utilize things like single sign-on. For some appliances and servers, we were able to use kind of a unified password that gave the appearance of single sign-on for other applications. And then we had a few applications that were still, what's going on? You need to call someone, things like that. Now, this worked okay for a little bit, but it was a very limited approach. Since everything was coming from one place, everything went to Active Directory, everything was kind of shoehorned into this pattern that we were following. You know, we couldn't really deviate from that. Some systems couldn't talk to AD the way we wanted because we were doing it a specific way. And we ended up having our system of record for everything basically still being our SIS, HCM, financial system, because that's what was feeding Active Directory to give its data, and then everything was talking to AD. So at that point, we decided we need to take a step back and just reevaluate and kind of start from scratch, go from the ground up. So we started building our new identity system. And to do that, we need to identify some common identity management pain points. And some of these may look familiar to you. We still deal with lots of these today. I'm sure you've dealt with some of these. Account readiness. So how many times have you had an employee who needs to start a little bit early because of reason X, Y, Z, and they need their email early. They're not going to be able to come on site to get it, but it needs to be ready 3 months early just because. That ever happen? Yeah. And lack of centralization. So, this department has this piece of software, but it needs to talk to Active Directory, and it needs to utilize single sign-on, but we don't know anything really about how it works because it's the software that they purchased and told us about the day before. It needed to be up and running. So lack of centralization. Unique types of users. So have you ever had that situation where there's a traveling scholar who's coming in for 1 year and needs access to these 3 things in this department's files, and then they'll be gone? Yeah. Deprovisioning. When people leave, how do we know what all systems they have access to so we can make sure that when they leave, we remove all the access they shouldn't have anymore? So deprovisioning was one of the biggest issues, one of the biggest pain points for us because we would miss things. Tracking down account issues, so that's our help desk, when somebody can't log in, when somebody's having trouble with an account. How do we solve that? What central place can we go to do that? Integration with third-party and legacy systems. How do we, in a standard way, integrate your Pitt State identity into a third-party system that's new or a legacy system that we want to kind of bring into the fold? When everything's all over the place, we can't do that. And then authorization rules for multiple systems. So we are living in a much more fragmented world as far as our software. We purchase one package for this. We purchase another package for that. We have separated financial systems, student systems, et cetera. So what if we need to look at multiple systems to tell something about you and what level of access you get to have? That was another pain point that was identified. So we set out to solve these. And in doing so, we created the structure for our new identity system. So let me explain this real quick. Basically, it starts really simple. Everybody has a Pitt State ID number and a username, and that is your Pitt State identity. We made the decision that if you're going to be using Pitt State services of any kind for a length of time, you need to have a Pitt State identity so we can track what you have access to. Now, that's not to say if you come on campus and you need to use Wi-Fi for a couple days, that doesn't count. Stuff like that, no big deal. But it starts with the Pitt State identity, and there are 2 unique identifiers, your ID and your username. From there, we kind of broke it out into what types of users do we generally have. We came up with 7 user types: employee, student employee, enrolled student, auxiliary employee, et cetera. Okay, and then general user, which is kind of a catch-all. And the reason we broke it out into these user types is because every type of user, kind of generic user by default, gets different services by default, right? So employees get an employee email address. They get access to the financial system. They get access to the HR system, things like that. A student gets access to our learning management system by default. They get access to a student email by default, et cetera. So these user types that we came up with are nothing more than a template that tell us what services do you get by default. That way, when someone comes on board, we make sure that they have the appropriate set of services ready to go for what type of user they are. So before an employee even walks through the door, 99% of the time, they have every service they're going to need to get started. We don't have to worry about, okay, they're here now, okay, now we got to set up email, we got to set up this access, we got to set up that access, and 2 weeks later, maybe the employee's ready to go. It's ready before they come on board because we know what an employee needs to get by default. It's in our system, it's set up that way. And if an employee might, we get a new system and an employee by default gets something else now, we make that a default for that type of user. We also have auth stores, authorization stores basically, and all this is a database that stores an account or a username and password. For the most part now we're utilizing Active Directory, but we have a couple other authorization stores like our student system and a legacy LDAP and things like that. And we only record that because each system that we use, our email, our campus Wi-Fi, et cetera, you have to have that username and password set up before you can use that service. So we basically just make sure that that's provisioned before the service is provisioned. So if the process says an employee is coming on board and they need Wi-Fi access, we'll make sure they're in Active Directory first. We'll set up their Wi-Fi access, and that's part of what being an employee means in our identity system. Okay? And then we also have an authorization level to this, which is basically Active Directory groups that we can pull data from different systems and consolidate it into a rule-based Active Directory group system. And this allows us to know what types of authorization you should have within the services you have access to. And I'm going to show the interface for this. I think it'll come together a little bit more. But that's the basic structure we came up with, and we found it's been very effective. We haven't really had the need to add a lot more user types or anything like that than the ones you see. Initially, there was a question of, okay, well, we need an emeritus user type. And we need this type of faculty user type and that type of faculty user type. And I said, I don't think we do, because most, those are the exceptions to the rule a lot of the time. Let's build the system around what we consistently have. We consistently have these types of users. And then let's handle those exceptions in a different way. And I'll show you how we do that. So these user types have served us pretty well in most cases. Now, just to dive a little bit deeper into user types, we decide what type of user you are every hour. We have a scheduled process that runs, and it looks at our HR system, and it looks at our student system. And it looks at the student system and says, are you newly enrolled? Are you a new student to us? If you are, we set your user type as student. You get all those services. If you're a new employee, we set your user type as employee. You get all those services. If you are no longer one of those, we remove that user type from you, and you lose those services. So that's a basic cycle that keeps kind of our default user types, our basic user types in sync. Because we look at the system of record, we look at your status there, and we add or remove what type of user you are based on that, and we keep it up to date very often. Now, we also have a process that allows us to be overridden. So when that employee needs to come on 3 months early, and they're not in the HR system yet, we can just override it and say, make this person an employee anyway. They'll get their email. They'll get all the services they would get, so they can start doing their job early if necessary. So we can override the system of record from our identity system. It is absolutely the king of the process. Now, the system services that you get, which are based on your user type, there's a couple things to note about those. They can be provisioned individually on demand or all together. So if I need to provision 10 services for you because you're an employee, I can do that all at once. If I need to just re-provision one because it's got a problem, I can do any of them on demand. And it's idempotent, meaning I can re-provision it 100 times and it's not going to cause a problem, right? Re-provisioning again isn't going to create you a new account or mess anything up. If you're already good to go, the system will figure that out and it will not mess anything up. We can have services that are automatically provisioned, which means like when I provision an email account via this mechanism, it's automatically going to go create it for an employee. But there are those services or those systems that are old or that have issues with APIs or access. And with those systems, we might use manual provisioning, which for us means we just send an email to someone. So when I add a system that's manually provisioned to someone, that an email goes out to the administrator of that system when this service is granted, and they know that they need to give access to someone. Excuse me. We can also delegate provisioning access, which means if we have someone who's just in charge of VPN, or we have someone who's just in charge of, say, Wi-Fi access, then they can just provision that for people and manage that for people. So everybody doesn't have to have access to give things to everyone. They can just do what they're in charge of, and I'll show that today. And then finally, I can give a service to anyone, whether it's an employee or a student. I can give an employee email to a student if I need to, if that situation arrives. We don't have the constraints, be the absolutes. By default, employees get employee emails, but I can give that employee email to anyone else if necessary. Okay. So these are some of the default services that an employee would get. So our LMS and a department network share and Office 365 and a Pitt State email, VPN, etc. And we basically write executables for every service. And by doing that, they're completely independent. So I can have one developer creating something that provisions Office 365, and another one writes something that provisions Canvas. Another one does something that provisions VPN. They don't know anything about each other. And when I provision any of these services, they go through our task system. And our task system goes ahead and does that provisioning in the background. So for one employee, that many separate provisioning jobs is going to be dropped. And like I said, they're all separate. If one fails, all the rest work just fine. They're not dependent on each other in any way, shape, or form. So that allows it to be very flexible. And if one fails, I can just re-provision it. It will probably work fine. Now, that's a lot of jobs that get dropped to our task processing system. So if I have 1,000 students coming on board or 100 students coming on board, I'm going to have thousands of jobs dropped to our task system. So if necessary, we can scale that up at any time to handle extra load. And sometimes we can, we'll do that when we have a lot of students coming on campus or things like that. Whoa. What's going on? Excuse me, I'm recovering from a cold, so my apologies. And then we also have a scheduled removal process. So if I give someone a service by hand and I say, this is going to expire in a year, we have a process behind the scenes that goes ahead and removes those services that need to expire. Now then we have our authorization level, which I think is one of the coolest parts of this. We have active directory groups for VPs and directors and chairs, and who's a pre-enrolled student, and who's a temporary non-benefits eligible employee, and what students are in engineering courses. This data comes from all over the place, and it comes from our student system, our finance system. It comes from some of our Pitt State middleware that we write in-house. We have a query processing engine that can look at all these systems and basically have rules that say who goes into what group. And those groups will be refreshed on a regular basis. And I'm going to borrow this. And basically kept in sync at any intervals that we want. So that's very useful. And then finally, we have all of this web service enabled. So we have a service graph behind this connected to our identity management system. And from that, I have directory APIs, I have notification APIs, I have APIs that we use in our Pitt State app, I have APIs that can power bots, since we just talked about AI. And so basically, this allows us to utilize our identity system from anywhere. Any system can reach out to our identity system and ask for an account to be provisioned or an account to be updated, anything like that. So without further ado, I think we need to do some demos. Oh, hi, Becky. Okay, so let's take a look at how this works in practice. Okay, so I'm going to go into our identity system. And this is just a web application that we wrote. It's based on a .NET stack. And we'll come back to this screen in oh, whoa, not showing up, not showing up. We're coming back. Demo fail. Okay, there we go. So I'll come back to this in a minute. But basically, I want to look at user types first. So here are all those user types that I mentioned to you a minute ago. And some user types aren't compatible with other user types, right? So you can't be a student and not a student at the same time. So we have what we call user type conflicts that allow me to say, if I give you the enrolled student user type, we're going to take away the non-enrolled student user type. So we have user type conflicts. We also have a priority for these user types. Basically, some user types kind of rank above others. So when I want to know what's your primary user type, for me, that's going to be an employee, even though I used to be a former student. That's a different user type. So we kind of rank them as well. We have an entire interface for the user type conflicts that I just mentioned. So if I go here, you can see I can't be an auxiliary and an employee at the same time. I can't be a disenrolled student and an enrolled student at the same time. So if one gets provisioned and the other's there, the other gets taken away. So we developed that very early on, and it seems to work fine. And if I ever need to add a new user type, I can just do it via these interfaces, add all the conflicts in, we're good to go. We're not going to have any issues there. Now, the next piece of this is the system services. I can set those up from this interface as well. So if I go to our system service maintenance page, and let me zoom out just a little bit, there's a lot going on here, But let me just show you what it looks like if I was going to add a new one. I give it a name. I say, where are the accounts that access this located? So for the most part for us these days, that's Active Directory. Does that service require that the person has a username, yes or no? How do we provision that? Automatically or just manually with a notification? How many days will you be in this service after it's removed? So some services we let you hang on to for a little bit after we take it away. So that's what this number is. So maybe you get this service for 30 days after I take it away, and then it'll be deprovisioned. We can do that. Any number of grace days, kind of. We can set what groups you might want to notify about changes with this service. And then here is the provisioning executable. I just put the name of an executable in here, and that's what's going to be dropped into our task processing system. So I might, if I was trying to provision access to our team foundation, I might have an executable for that, something like that. And then if I have a deprovisioning executable, it works the same way. We just drop executables into our task system to deprovision. If we need to change our username, we drop an executable to do that. So every system handles username changes differently. We can handle every system's username changes individually by dropping an executable for that system. And if I have a particular group that manages this system, I can put in the name of that group here, and that group will have access to this system to manage, but no others. And if there's somewhere that an administrator can go to manage this service in more depth, I can put the URL for that here. And you'll see how this all comes together in just a minute. Okay, so let me go into a person's identity. So look up. Go into a test user here. So I've got someone here who's set up basically to not really have a whole lot of anything. Their user type is general user. They're only in one authorization store. They only have accounts located in one place, and they only have one service. So let's say this is my faculty member who needs to start 30 days earlier. Actually, let's say this is my traveling scholar who's going to be with us for 1 year, and they need access to a department share, and they need access to a campus email while they're here. So I'm just going to come in here, and I'm going to add a service. I'm going to give them a Pitt State email. How about that? PSU email. Okay? And I'm going to say they get this for 1 year, and hit save. Okay? So this little thing popped up in the right-hand corner. That tells me this is provisioning right now. I can click on that, and I can actually watch the provisioning happening from our task server in real time in this console. So I know it's a little bit small, but basically it tells me that provision job got dropped, and then a few minutes later what the status of that was. And I've been testing with this person, so they already have an email. I didn't remove it, but you can see that completed. They would be provisioned now. So I can watch and make sure that that finishes, even though I'm not really directly touching that process. And so now that person has a Pitt State email for the next year, and then when the year is over, it's going to be gone, and I don't really have to worry about it. I could give them access to our campus Wi-Fi as well. And note, if they don't get this service by default and I try to add it, it's going to tell me that I have to put an expiration on this. They don't get this by default. It has to be removed at some point. So I can do that here as well. So it's very, very simple for one of us who has access to do this to come in and give people a very customized set of services with expiration dates. Excuse me. So let's say this person is an employee and they're starting early. So I can come in here and I can add a user type of employee and watch what happens when I do that. It's going to hit save. They just got everything that an employee needs to get by default. I'm done. I don't have to do anything else. They have it all. And they can start early. And if I don't want this stuff to be removed by our hourly process that says, wait a minute, they're not an employee, I can hit this button to turn syncing off on their account. And our hourly processing will say, okay, I'm not touching this account now. That there's still some work we want to do with this, have a date for it to go back on, stuff like that when they would come on board. But this is the quick way right now that we're able to kind of work outside of the default constraints of the system and give people a status that they might not normally have. And it's been very effective for us so far. Now, the next thing that I want to do is show you how we handle when there are problems with this, because you saw that there were a lot of background things happening. When I provision someone's services, it goes into a background queue. So I want to show you how we typically would handle an email, or not an email, an error. Okay, so I can't force an error to happen from here because we didn't build the system to allow errors to happen automatically. So I had to write a little program to make this error happen. And when I was writing this program yesterday, one of my colleagues probably jokingly said, "You should put that in an infinite loop or something." So that's exactly what I did. So I wrote a program that would infinitely break our identity system, and I'm going to run it today for you guys because there's nothing better than a demo during, or a testing during a demo. Okay, errors. We're going to watch this for the next 20 minutes, and this is how we know something bad's going to happen. And then we have a real-time representation of our data center right now. Okay, so people back in Pittsburgh might not be very happy, and unfortunately, the system is gone, so I don't know if we can continue. So let me just get out of here. And when we blow it up, it gets kind of cranky. So, okay. Yeah, okay. So now I'm really going to cause the error to happen. So this is going to cause an error to happen. Okay. Running for real. Actual explosion in Pittsburgh. Okay. Ooh. I have to be VPN for this to happen. Now we're really in trouble. Yay. So say something goes wrong behind the scenes, there's a problem, something like that, that causes something to just not work quite right. We didn't want our background worker process to be a black hole. We wanted to make sure that we were aware when problems happen so we can fix them before they are issues for our help desk. We don't want our help desk to have to take the brunt of those issues. So when that error happens, or when any kind of error on provisioning or anything in the background happens, I get an email. And anybody in the group that is set up will get an email. Not that email. Where is it? Okay, so anyway, what typically happens is, is I get an email like this. This is one from earlier this morning, actually, that basically just says, there was an issue with this Office 365 provisioning. The server was unwilling to process the request, blah, blah, blah. Be nice, server. So what I would do at that point is I would probably first go into the identity management system and say, where's Office 365? Reprovision. And 90% of the time that solves the problem because it's a transient error. It happens. Office 365 is in the cloud. It has problems once in a while. The second you hit it, it may be feeling cranky. So typically this fixes it. If not, we'll dig into the error deeper. The point is we know what's happening in the system, even though it's often happening in the background, and we fix most errors before they're ever a problem for the end user this way. We can get those error messages to our email. We can get them to our Skype for Business. They can be Skyped to us. And when I would really had first started building this system, I had them texted to me, which was really good incentive to fix things, because I woke up with 200 text messages one morning. Okay, so go back here. So that's how we deal with errors, and we've been very effective at usually fixing them before they're a problem. Now I want to go back to that kind of nice-looking main menu and talk about that a little bit. We have a profiler as well that is constantly checking the status of all the identities in the system to make sure that none of them are kind of out of whack in any way. And that's what's displayed across the top here. So there's one identity that has a provisioning issue, which means it doesn't have the services it should have. It's missing some. There's one that has a deprovisioning issue, which means it has too many services. And then this is a task about our scheduled processes, whether or not they're being healthy or not. So I can actually go, if there's a provisioning issue on any account, I can click on it. It'll give me a list of accounts that have those issues. Fix. It's fixed. It's going to give them the services they need. It's going to reprovision anything that's out of whack. That's all it takes. I do want to automate that at some point, but I thought it'd be nice to see, how often that comes up. Not too often, but every once in a while there's an issue. Same with deprovisioning issues. I could click into here and fix it. And then we also have the profiler checks our, oh, that's a different notification. The profiler checks our scheduled processes and makes sure that they're running every hour, tells us what they're doing. So for instance, this particular reconciliation for user types added 1 employee, it added 28 students, it removed 2 students, etc. Okay? So we can check on that as needed. And then finally, we have some analytics down here, and these are powered by Microsoft Power BI, which is a great tool if you haven't used it. And I can take a look at this and I can see, okay, how many new identities have we had this week? Brand new identities, how many new user types, things like that. It's, this week we're having new students on campus that are getting enrolled. So there's quite a few new users. Those 102 people, most of them are probably new students who just got enrolled. And I can actually click through this and I can see particulars of, here's new identities, and here's one of those Skype notifications, by the way, so that's cool. Here's new identities. Here's user types added, here's services added. So we can look, very in-depth at this data if we ever need to. We don't usually have to, but there have been times where there's a little bit of a what's going on, and we're able to get to the bottom of issues usually very quickly. Okay, so that's all I want to show in the identity management interface that we built. Next, I want to show those rule-based groups that I mentioned for authorization, because I think they're pretty cool. Excuse me. Okay. So this is our rules-based group screen. You can see some of these groups, groups that most universities have: deans, directors, exempt employees, faculty, temporary employees, etc. And the way these groups work is they go query the system of record to see who should be in these groups. And they will do that at whatever interval we specify here. So I'm going to query for currently enrolled students every 30 minutes, okay? But I'm only going to query who's a chair every, that's like once a day. And it just depending on the importance that group is kept up to date and the amount of churn in that group, I could have it refresh every 5 minutes. I could have it refresh every year. It doesn't matter. So I'm going to add one right now. I'm going to add a group for student employees who have a picture in our Pitt State directory who are taking accounting classes. So that's a query from all 3 of our main systems: our student system, our PSU apps middleware, and our employee system, to get that information. Okay? So let me just call this demo group. I'm going to have this refresh every, once a day or so. And this little drop down is pretty handy because I can say, does this group, is it allowed to have 0 members? So our employees group isn't allowed to have 0 members. We're always going to have employees, right? So if there's an error in any of those queries that causes 0 people to come back, I don't want it to wipe out the group. If I say 0 members is not allowed, then it's going to terminate that query if it brings back 0 people. But for this group, I don't care. 0 is fine. So demo group. And I'm going to go ahead and add a couple rules to this group. And you don't have to watch me stumble through typing queries. I've got them here. So here's the query for our student system. Okay, so selecting people enrolled in accounting courses. Yes. Put that in the wrong field. Okay. Enabled. I have to test every rule or validate every rule to make sure it works before I save it. Validating. Somebody lied about that. Okay, so I got 568 people taking accounting courses. Great. So let me save that. And then I want to do a query from our Oracle system. So this is Oracle SQL versus whatever this was going against Universe Basic. Okay. So my demo group, I'm going to add another rule to it. This comes from Oracle. Did it again. There's the query. Enabled. Should get a few student employees back from our Oracle HR system. Okay, a few student employees. And then how about those people in our directory who are allowing a picture to be shown for them? So that's going to come out of our Microsoft SQL database. So let me grab that query. Add it. I'm going to do it right this time. Uh-oh. Okay. All right. And then this should give us a few people back who have pictures enabled. Submit. Okay. So I now have that group set up. So I now have a group for, I already forgot the criteria. I have a group for student employees who have pictures in our directory who are taking accounting courses, okay? And I could refresh that group right now. I can force any of these groups to refresh on demand, and it's going to go reach out, execute those queries, and get all the membership for that group from all our systems of record. So as you can imagine, that's extremely flexible, right? I can have groups updating in real time for authorization from pretty much any piece of data we possibly could care about people and what role they're in. And if we go into this group, within a few minutes there's going to be some names here, so just sit tight. The other thing that we can do with these groups is say there's someone who needs to be in one of these groups but doesn't really meet any kind of queryable criteria. There's an exception. There's a director coming on board, but they're not set up yet, but they need this access. I can add an exception because demo and for a person, so I really want to be in this group. And I can set an expiration date for that. So in, tomorrow, I'm going to be taken out of this group. But this allows me to add exceptions to these rule-based groups as well. So that's, makes them extremely flexible. So there, I'm an exception in this group until tomorrow. That's my refresh. So there's all of our, and I'm in there too, I promise. So there's all of our student employees who have pictures in the directory who are taking accounting courses. I just built that group that could be used for authorization purposes in a couple minutes. So we've been adding lots of these groups, and it's been a very good tool for us. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about or show is where we're thinking about going with this in the future. So as I mentioned, this is all API-atized, for lack of a better term. All of this is enabled web services. We can do just about anything we want to with that service graph that I showed you. And this ties in pretty well into the keynote because AI bots, this is becoming much more of a thing. So I thought, what if it didn't matter where you were in our middleware, it didn't matter where you were on our web stack, what if you could ask our identity system a question? So this is Identity Bot, and he can tell me information about people. So I could say, let me zoom in here. I could say, find Nathaniel Shaw. He's sitting right there. Okay, so I found a match for Nathaniel Shaw. I went and hit our web services. I have all the information. I would need to find more information about Nathaniel now, especially his Pitt State ID most likely, or his email, or his title. I could query for more information easily about Nathaniel now that I have some basic info. I could say, who is the current CIO? It's Angela Neria. It's able to find that from our identity system using a directory API that we have enabled. I could say, who is in the position programmer? And it's going to find me all the programmers that we have on staff, like that. And this is using a natural language kind of AI on the back end, so I can phrase my questions all kinds of different ways. It's going to figure it out. It's going to pick it up. So, one more time. Find people named John Keefler. That's going to bring back me. And as you saw, I phrased it differently than my last query. So I think this has a lot of potential because it doesn't matter what web page I'm on. I can embed this into it. The bot knows who I am, so it can refuse to show me people I shouldn't be able to see. These bots can be used in things like Skype for Business, which means if I'm on my mobile device and I have Skype for Business, I can still do this kind of thing on the go. I can say stuff back to the bot, provision his services, give me more info about his status, stuff like that. It can happen. So by having these APIs enabled, it really gives us a lot of flexibility there with what we can do. And this is just one of those applications that I'm looking at and that I think could be very useful, not only just for a day-to-day process of finding information, but also using these bots as a go-between, for us and our help desk and our customers. These bots can do a lot of the legwork. Rather than having a person finding information, clicking through a couple screens, finding that information, and then viewing it, why not have the bot go intelligently find the information and deliver it to the help desk attendant in real time? They don't have to worry about doing that. So all those things are possible with these APIs that we have built into our identity system. And I'm really excited to see what we're going to be able to do with them in the future. Let's see. OK. So I think we have about 5 minutes left. Yeah, so I just want to, are there any questions that I can answer? Bill?
Once you have this all set up, how much time do you spend dealing with exceptions as opposed to just watching?
Kind of ebbs and flows, but I would say we're not spending that much time dealing with exceptions. We have them like once or twice a month, maybe 4 or 5 times a month at the most. So the thing about those exceptions is they're a huge pain if you don't have a way to handle them. And they cost you a lot of time if you don't have a way to handle them. But once you kind of are able to handle them, you kind of stop thinking about them because they're not such a pain. Other questions? Yeah?
How many humans do you have manage ID creation?
How many humans do we have managing ID creation? That's a good... ID management, that's a good question. So we tried to get as many human hands out of that pot as possible because it causes problems when everybody's trying to create accounts. So it's basically just our HR department now, 1 or 2 people there. When they onboard an employee, they actually go to a screen in our identity system and set them up. And when they do that, it gets their email and stuff ready. Our student system does it automatically. So the code in our student system does it. And then we have people in our library who actually do it too because we have community patrons who come there. So it's 3 main places basically now. Good question. What do we use for a student system? We have a homegrown legacy student system that is on a universe basic database. And it's difficult to do these things in that system, but it is not difficult to hit a web URL with an API. So we kind of offloaded all that creation into this system. So all our student system has to do is say, I need a new identity. We create the identity, give the ID back. The student system does the student system stuff. Other questions? Yeah?
Earlier you were talking about manually or creating an HR appointment before they actually started.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have to work with HR before setting that up, getting that approval for owning that information?
Yeah, we have had to work pretty closely with our HR department on that stuff. Typically, I think the process, if we do have someone who's going to, have that special access early, is they'll notify us in writing, and then they'll give us the information we need. Sometimes HR will just go ahead and create the identity because they can do that, and then we'll just put in those overrides that say, yeah, they get to have their accounts, early, and we're going to stick them that way until they get here. So. Mm-hmm.
You also mentioned during that process you turn off the sync.
Mm-hmm.
So when they do get fully entered, it doesn't mess with anything. Do
Right.
you have a way of turning that sync back on so when they become provisioned later,
Mm-hmm.
it follows through?
Yeah, so I mentioned I want that to be automatic in the future where I could put a date for that syncing to turn back on automatically, but right now it's just going in and clicking a button, and then the syncing's turned back on and it looks at the system of record and it'll follow that. So, yep, good question. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much.